Okay, I think we're going to get started. Okay, yeah. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's development information meeting for the proposed development at 6310 Hazeldean Road. I'm Glenn Gower, and I'm the city councilor for Stittsville. And I know there's a ton of community interest in this proposal, and really appreciate the number of residents who've taken the time to join us tonight. Just looking at the counter as it goes up, we're over 200, getting close to 250 attendees. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Just want to go over a little bit the agenda for today's meeting. So tonight, we're joined by a number of representatives from FOTEN and Devmont, who are the applicants. So we'll meet them in just a few minutes. I'll have a short presentation to bring us into context about why we're here and where we're at in the planning process, followed by a presentation by the applicant. But the bulk of tonight's meeting will really be an opportunity for you as residents to share your questions and comments for the applicant team. So when we get to the Q&A portion, there are two ways that you can ask a question. You can either raise your hand using the button on your Zoom screen. If you're on a computer or a laptop, there's a set of buttons across the bottom of Zoom, and you'll see a way to raise your hand. If you're joining on a mobile device or an iPad, it's somewhere on your screen, but sometimes it's not really obvious where it is. But if you look for the menu, you'll be able to find raise your hand. That's if you want to speak, to ask a question or share a comment. You can also look for the Q&A panel to type in your question. So that's another button on your Zoom screen, and you can type in your question. We're not using the chat function for questions, so you do need to use the Q&A panel to type in a question, and we'll read that out on your behalf. We have a lot of people tonight on our call. Like I said, around 250 logged in right now. So I am going to ask you keep your questions as brief as possible so that we can get to as many of you as possible. We're set to go here for about 2 hours. From 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. So like to get as many people a chance to ask a question or share a comment as possible. And also remind you to please participate in a respectful way in the meeting this evening. We are recording this meeting, and it will be posted on YouTube later tonight or tomorrow. And it'll also be linked from my website, glenngower.ca. And we'll be providing a summary of the meeting to the city planner. So it'll be form part of the official comments for this. I just put together a few slides to set us up here. Get back over there. So this is a proposal for 6310 Hazeldean Road. This is a resubmission. We had a submission for this property back in spring of 2022. This is very much a new submission entirely. It's for 431 apartments and 2 buildings with heights stepping up from 3 stories to 25 stories. With the tallest building along Hazeldean Road. They're proposing 389 parking spaces for residents and 86 spaces for visitors, and also 446 bicycle parking spaces. I've said the name Devmont. They're the owner and the developer of this property. FOTEN, they are the planning consultants. So we have representatives from both Devmont and FOTEN who are here tonight. The zoning bylaw amendment itself is asking for 2 changes to the existing zoning. Zoning bylaw requires a maximum height of 15 meters. This development proposes a height of 77 meters. And the zoning bylaw requires a minimum vehicle parking space of 1.2 spaces per unit. And the applicant is asking for an exemption to reduce that to 0.9 spaces per dwelling unit. There's no other changes to setbacks or landscaping buffers or anything else in the zoning. The reason we're seeing this now, just to put a bit in context, is in Ottawa's official plan, which was approved by the province in 2022. Areas along major roads like Hazeldean Road, March Road, Eagleson Road are a focus area for new development. And so this is the first 25-story building being proposed here, but I expect we'll see more applications for higher density and taller buildings along roads like Hazeldean and Eagleson and March Road. These are major corridors that the city will be focusing transit. So more bus service, more frequent bus service, priority bus lanes, priority traffic signals, and so on. They're the major transportation corridors, and that's where a lot of Ottawa's growth will happen over the next 25 years across the entire city. Some of the feedback we've had so far about this development, just putting it in broad themes, obviously a lot of concern about the height, especially as it relates to the current zoning bylaw and shadows impact, transportation infrastructure, CARP Road, OC Transpo, and parking, concerns about amenities in the area, potential impact on water and sewer and hydro capacity, property values, community character, parking, affordability, and construction impact. And I'm sure we'll hear about a lot of these from residents as we go tonight. Right now, this is not approved, so this is still going through a public and technical review part of the planning process and issue resolution. So this is a part of the process that takes weeks and often months, where planning goes back and forth with the applicant to resolve issues that come up, to identify concerns raised by the public and also by internal stakeholders at the city. And then eventually staff will do an analysis of the proposal and make a recommendation to the city's planning committee as to whether to approve or refuse the proposal. And then it goes to city council. If city council approves or does not approve, there's then a 20-day appeal period where it can be appealed. Council's decision can be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and it's the Ontario Land Tribunal that has the final say on planning matters. Many of you have already provided comments or questions to Sarah Ezio, the city planner. I put her phone number and her email address up there on the screen, and you can also find that on my website. If you are interested in more information about this development, it's really important that you contact Sarah. By emailing her, you can get notice of future meetings, notice of staff's recommendation on the application when it's listed on the planning committee agenda, information about how you can register to speak in front of planning committee or provide written comments to the committee and council, and information as well on how you can appeal council's decision in the event that you wish to do so. And we'll continue to share information about this file on my website. And there's a shortcut there, glengower.ca/development. That's where we post all of our information about this development and other planning files in our Stittsville community. So with that, I am going to stop my screen share and pass the baton to Miguel Tremblay, who's with FOTEN, and he'll introduce the team with him this evening and walk us through their presentation. Hi, Miguel.
Hey, good evening, and good evening, everyone. Everybody can hear me? I'm good? Yep.
You're good.
So I am a partner and an urban planner at FOTEN Planning and Design. We are an urban planning, urban design, and landscape architecture firm, and we're assisting Devmont in the applications. So what I'll do is, just to tip our hand a little bit, I'm going to introduce the entire team that's here. Then I will just walk you through a little bit what our presentation format is. We're probably going to speak for about 30 minutes or so, 25, 30 minutes. There's a fair amount of information. It is a resubmission. The intent of this meeting is first and foremost to share information, make sure that everyone is up to speed on the revised development application. It's also to hear your comments. At times we may just be listening and taking notes, but then there will be a question and answer period where we again still be listening, but we may offer some clarifications and some responses with respect to your inquiries. I am joined tonight by Patricia Warren. Patricia's a planner in our office. From the developer, we have Sam Scalia and Felix Allaire. And then from Figure Architects, the project architect, we have Roberto Campos, Cassandra Sims, and Daniela Weissman. In terms of our presentation, I will continue to make some opening remarks, if you don't mind. And then I'm going to turn over to Patricia, who's going to provide you with maybe a little bit more of a fulsome overview of the applicable policies. And those policies have been evolving and changing, and it's dictated our approach this application and dictates the city's approach as well. And then Roberto is going to provide an overview of the most recent 25-story and 9-story designs. But before we do all that, we'll turn it over to Sam and Felix for some introductory remarks about Devmont, because they're a new builder in the City of Ottawa, Montreal-based, and we thought it'd be a good idea for you, for your community to be properly introduced. We also have Andrew Hart. Andrew Hart is from CGH, and they are the transportation consultants. Now, Andrew's not going to present, but as expected, we will get a lot of transportation comments, and Andrew is here to respond to those. And we thought that might be the best approach. You should know as well that there are a range of other consultants that have participated to this application, including geotech consultants for soil stability, environmental consultants, tree for tree preservation, servicing consultants. The reality is we don't get a lot of comments for those consultants. It's rare that people have stormwater questions. We typically don't bring them to the meetings. But if you do have very specific questions that we can't answer, and by the way, all their reports are available on the municipal website, we'll make best efforts to get you those answers, maybe through the councillor's office. So with that, I may just make a few opening remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Sam and Felix, and then Patricia. But you know, the application has changed significantly from the original 9-story submission, and there's probably 3 reasons for that. Really, is, well, first, the province has provided very clear and well-articulated direction to municipalities to meet and achieve their housing targets, in particular for purpose-built rental apartment buildings, to address, you know, provincial and citywide housing needs. These housing forms are intended to be accommodated not on an area basis. It's not about our downtowns anymore and our core areas, but it's more of a citywide approach. So you're seeing a lot of these types of applications in the inner and urban areas, and even in suburban communities. Secondly, as Councillor Gower alluded to, our new official plan, it's now council approved and provincially approved, directs density and building heights to strategic areas and key streets defined in our official plan as corridors. Now, not all of these streets are yet characterized by transit, but all have the potential to accommodate density and future transit facilities over time. And that's why, you know, the city is starting to experience a lot of applications on Innis and Baseline Road, Montreal Road, Carling, Eagleson, and now Hazeldean. These are all comparable streets from a policy and a transportation perspective, and they're all target areas for intensification. It's not surprising. FOTEN gets to work on a lot of these applications. I will say that it's quite rare to work on a site that is this large and this deep. This site ranges from 58 meters to 100 meters at its maximum depth. Most of these corridors are characterized by 30 and 40 meter depths. So this is a very important opportunity, I think, for Stittsville and the city to accommodate some additional density and height. The project, lastly, has evolved from the 9-story concept to the taller high-rise concept, in large part to provide a better transition to the low-rise residential neighborhood to the south. While the building is taller and will be seen by a much broader area as a result, the new design has a better separation to the abutting neighborhood, and Roberto is going to walk you through that. And it's really about a redistribution of massing and height that are now permitted by these OP policies. The policies recognize and provide guidance to these streets, such as Hazeldean, that are intended to have, and I want to make this statement, and I know not everybody will like it, but streets like Hazeldean are intended to have a different function and a different character than the inner urban areas, or like the low-rise areas to the south and to the west. Arterial roads, these corridors are supposed to function differently. They're supposed to have high-rise and mid-rise buildings. So it's not unreasonable for the community to feel that there is a friction with their existing character, but that's very much the function of these streets. So maybe with that, I'll leave my comments. Sam and Felix, before Patricia goes through and walks through the policies, did you want to provide a bit of an overview of Devmont?
You guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. So thank you, Miguel, for the introduction, and thank you, Mr. Gower. My name is Sam Scalia. I'm the founder and president of Devmont. I'm here tonight with our VP Development, Felix Alaid, who's been with us for the last 13 years. In the last 20 years, Devmont has specialized in multi-phase lifestyle condominium projects that have been amenity-heavy, energy-efficient, quality-driven, mostly in the greater Montreal area. We've been pioneers of developing new areas of the city, and through thoughtful planning and quality architecture, our projects have become signature in their respective areas. Most recently, we've built a complete neighborhood in Montreal called Westbury, Montreal, which includes retail and office space, multi-phase luxury condominiums, a 300-room Hilton hotel, and a Central Park. We are strong believers in being involved in the communities we build. This involvement has made us the main private donor of Multicaf, a prominent food kitchen in Montreal. We were introduced to the Stittsville property in April of last year, as the owners of the property are ex-Montrealers. Being one of the fastest growing cities in Ontario and having world-class amenities with its recreation center, Stittsville has great potential for us. The property is located in front of a farm boy for easy grocery shopping and many commercial retail that are easily accessible by foot. We like the lot because of its depth, which would give us more flexibility in creating a unique architecture and having the ability to step down to have a minimum impact in the neighborhood abiding to the property. The sensitivity of the transition was the main focus in all our design decisions that were made. For every decision, we were mindful to have the least impact and to look at the development from the lens of the existing residents. Foten and Figure put forward a very well thought out design that proposes a unique architecture in the 25-story and a gradual transition from 9 to 7 to 3 to the abiding property. The setbacks of the building to the property lines are very generous and fully landscaped. Even the roof top amenities that we designed have a green buffer zone in order to respect the privacy of the neighborhood. With regards to unit mix, we have units ranging from 500 square feet for our lofts, 700 square feet for the one bedrooms. We have 1 bedrooms plus den, 2 bedrooms, and all our 3 bedrooms are over 1,200 square feet. The target for the 3 bedrooms is about 10%. And with regards to pricing, we will be more affordable than the market, as we will be financed by one of the CMHC programs. Presently, with market conditions, we're targeting about $1,900 for a 1 bedroom and approximately $2,500 for a 2 bedroom. The project that we designed consists of ample amenity space and more than 20,000 square feet that is situated in an elevated area that will include community gardens, pool, lounging areas, and plenty of green landscaping. We will design the project to achieve better than 25% efficiencies of the 2017 National Building Code, supply at least 10% EV stations, and bike storage for everyone. And just to let you know, this is very typical of what we do in Montreal. We will also provide an electrical car sharing service that will significantly reduce the number of parking spots required, and this will definitely help our clients from an economic standpoint by reducing the dependency on the car. Only visitor parking will be located on grade. The rest will all be indoors. So we feel that we have a great project. We've been working very hard with our professionals for the last almost year, and we look forward to being part of this community. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Patricia, do you want to just jump in and?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just skip over this slide because Miguel kind of introduced who FO10 is, and Roberto Campos from Bigger. He'll be speaking about the design in a little bit, and he can introduce himself when it's his turn. I'll start with the application status and the process. Councillor Gower sort of went over this, but I'll just provide a little bit more detail. So the site is currently subject to an active zoning bylaw amendment application. The revised design and submission package was provided to the city this past December 2023. And the technical circulation period for the application has recently concluded, and we did receive comments today from the city. And so as part of the next steps for this application, the proposal will be revised as necessary, taking into consideration the comments that were received from city staff, technical agencies, and the public through the technical circulation process, as well as comments from tonight's public meeting. A resubmission will then be provided to the city for consideration. The statutory public meeting for the zoning bylaw amendment application is held at the city's Planning and Housing Committee. So tonight isn't the statutory meeting. Tonight is just an information session for the public to get some more information and for us to gather information as the project team. A date has not yet been determined for Planning and Housing Committee. That would be determined as we progress through the application process. And at that meeting, a committee of councillors will consider the application and make a recommendation to City Council. Once the zoning bylaw amendment application is completed, development on the site won't start yet. In the event it's approved, the proposal does need to go through a site plan control application. And that is an application where the details of the proposal are reviewed in more detail than a zoning bylaw amendment. And so some additional plans and studies are required for city review at that stage. So jumping into the planning framework, and Councillor Gower did touch on this briefly, but a new official plan, the City of Ottawa's new official plan, was approved in November 2022 after the initial submission of the zoning bylaw amendment for this site. As part of the new official plan, the subject property has been designated as a Main Street corridor located within the suburban transect of the city. The Main Street corridor and suburban transect policies of the official plan provide direction for increased building heights and densities along Main Street corridors within the city. And within suburban transects, high-rise buildings, which include heights up to 40 stories, are permitted on Main Street corridors where the lot fabric can provide a suitable transition to abutting low-rise areas. So that's where the lots are deep enough to be able to provide that transition to the low-rise neighborhoods abutting the site. The official plan also directs that development along a corridor establish buildings that locate their maximum building heights and their maximum density along the corridor. So in this case, this would be right along Hazeldean Road. Suitable transition can be achieved through a variety of design tools. And this could include building step backs. As you get closer to the abutting low-rise area, the building gets lower in height, as well as building setbacks from a property line. So that's how far away the building is from the property line. The 45-degree angular plane, that's also a tool of measurement that can be used to guide the transition measures. The official plan also supports a range of dwelling unit sizes with direction for multi-unit dwellings to be located on corridors, as well as a range of housing types to be located on corridors. So the zoning bylaw is a legal document that provides site-specific performance standards for development within the city. The city's existing zoning bylaw is fairly outdated, just given that it does not currently align with the official plan that we have in place now. It also doesn't fully align with some parts of the old official plan as well. And so that's why we go through these zoning bylaw amendments so that they're more site specific to development that is being proposed. I would also note that the city is currently undertaking a new zoning bylaw amendment. And so that would see that parts of the new official plan are implemented in the zoning to kind of get us up to speed, I guess, the zoning up to speed with the official plan. So with respect to the current site, it is currently zoned Arterial Main Street, Subzone 9, Urban Exception 2102. The existing zoning for the site currently permits a range of residential and non-residential uses, and it limits the maximum permitted building height to 15 meters. And as part of the proposed development, a zoning bylaw amendment has been requested to remove the existing urban exception on the property, as that urban exception does not apply to a residential use. And the zoning bylaw amendment also seeks to increase the maximum permitted building height to 77 meters, which would accommodate the 25-story built form, and reduce the required parking rate from 1.2 spaces per unit to 0.9 spaces per unit. The proposed development currently complies with all other zoning provisions that are applicable to the subject property. So Roberto Campos, the project architect, he's going to go over the design in detail, but on this slide, I'll just go over some of the key changes from the proposal that was presented to the community. I think it was the end of May of 2022. So there have been some changes that have been made, but notably the revised proposal has been, it has reshaped the building form, locating the bulk of the building mass along Hazeldean Road. This reshaped building form has resulted in an improved transition to the abutting low-rise residential properties to the rear of the subject property, with a separation of approximately 50 meters between the tower portion of the building to the rear property line. A 10-meter landscape strip has also been provided between the proposed development and the rear property line, extending the landscaped area that currently exists between the subject property and the residential properties to the rear. And this also satisfies the existing zoning requirements for a 10-meter rear yard setback. This landscape strip also provides vegetation to the site while also ensuring visual screening for the abutting properties. An amenity area has also been located within the interior portion of the site above a new 3-story parking structure, replacing what was previously shown as surface parking in the last design. The amenity area also provides a buffer between the 9-story portion of the proposed development and the abutting properties to the rear of the site. Retail space has been removed from the proposed development, and that was consistent with some direction that we received from the Urban Design Review Panel. And the removal of the retail space has actually allowed for the integration of at-grade patios for units fronting onto Hazeldean Road. And finally, the building materiality has also been revised, and this will contribute to the transition in the height of the buildings with the change of the materiality as the buildings transition. So with that, that sort of ends my section, and I'll turn it over to Roberto for the design portion of the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening. First, just want to thank the councillor for helping to organize this event tonight. 295 is certainly a record, as Councillor Gower said, for his constituents, and it's certainly a big number for any presentation. And so we definitely take this very, very serious. Irrelevant whether it's almost 300 people or 25 people, these events are really important for us to get feedback. We really are here with the intention of getting feedback and also providing a good presentation of how the proposal has been developed over the last few months. As Sam has said, this is not something that's just has been easy to develop. It does take time. It does take effort and a good team and a good quality group of consultants to put together a proposal like this. So we certainly appreciate everybody who's attending tonight. As mentioned, the proposal really looks to adjust, the proposal has adjusted itself based on a lot of the comments that was given to the team at the last presentation to the Urban Design Review Panel, as well as some other meetings with communities and with planning staff. As mentioned, this is a 2-building proposal, with building 1 being up to 9 stories, with some transitions from 3 to 6 stories. Building 2 obviously is the one with the larger building with 25 stories, and transitioning down to 7 and then 3 as it hits towards the south. As Sam had mentioned in his remarks, we are looking to provide over 400 units, 431 units, and what I think is really important is also the quality of the units that's being proposed here is over 165 2-beds and over 52 3-bedroom units. This is quite a large amount of what we would consider larger units for an apartment building. And so, the intent certainly of the proposal is not to fill this with studios and 1-bedrooms, but actually to try to get a good range of families and tenants into this new community. And so I think that those are quite important statistics that we need to also keep in mind. Next slide, please. Oh, can we switch to next slide? I don't know. I don't have control. Nope. Whoever's got this slide, Patricia, or oh.
Why don't you keep going, Roberto, and we'll try to catch up to you as we go.
Okay. No, it's just hard for me to switch slides here, but maybe what I'll do is, oh, Patricia, you there? Oh, there we go. Here's a slide that kind of shows the context of the site. Obviously, backing onto Kyle Avenue and Crantham Crescent, fronting Hazeldean for the most part. As mentioned, that as opposed to the previous proposals, which was a 3-building proposal, we really tried to focus this layout on trying to front as much as we can on Hazeldean, and also look at how we can provide the least impact in the end overall. And so as you can see here, some of the existing context that's around us. So right across the street is obviously a large strip center that includes a Farm Boy and a retail plaza. So as mentioned, this is very important with regards to commercial access immediately across the street. I know we've seen already some questions and even some comments before. Why is there no commercial on the ground floor here? The reality is that it'd be very difficult to actually get commercial onto this site to make it successful when you have the competing commercial across the street. Obviously, this is just about a bit of a blocks, I guess, call it southwest of Carp Road. But this kind of gives you a good indication of the site itself. Can we get to the next slide? Some images of the property right now. Next slide. So this was the proposal done back in 2022. It was not done by our office. We came in after this was presented to the Urban Design Review Panel, and as part of the ownership group came in, and that's when we were engaged to provide design for this project. And as you can see in the original concept, it was a 3-building proposal with not as much specifically fronting onto Hazeldean, and a significant amount of surface parking at the south portion of the property. And a lot of the comments from the Urban Design Review Panel was really that there was a lack of mix in the elevations. There was a lack of mix in the massing. It was, a complete 9-story wall all the way around the site. and then full of surface asphalt parking spaces. And so, we take those comments and work from there as a starting point, knowing that this was kind of what was first explored. What's also important to know is that, this is going to be a very short presentation today. We obviously want to get as much time from the question and answers, and that what we haven't shown here is the pages and pages and pages and pages of, sketches and organization of plans and test fits and all that kind of stuff. But believe me, there is quite a bit of work that goes into these presentations. We didn't just come up with the proposal that is put in here. So there's quite a bit of that. But it starts with this one. Next slide. Again, this is one of our initial concepts that we looked at the one that was done previously to us joining, and then kind of reimagining it, and then ultimately working over and over. Next slide. And then ultimately how it comes to this one. So the project, as mentioned, proposes a 2-tower development with one building being of 9, and then stepping down to 6, and then to 3, and then building 2, which is 25, stepping down to 7, and then to 3. What we also show in the concepts is kind of the potential of what can happen on Hazeldean Road into the future as the city begins to reimagine the future of Hazeldean Road. There is a right of way that is applied to Hazeldean under the current zoning, which means that the city will ultimately require us to not build right to our property line, but actually to build to this line that has been determined that the city may ultimately take into the future to reimagine the design of Hazeldean Road, either with mass transit lanes or bike lanes or green buffer lanes. And so what we wanted to do is actually show in our concepts is the potential of what it could be once Hazeldean can get reimagined, which is what you kind of see in this image here. Next slide. Again, more of that image. The idea is that on building 1 is to have ground floor with direct access units to the street, which is what you see there. Next slide. This is now a view kind of looking southwest towards building 1, and then building 2 at the intersection. So we've actually kept the existing intersection lines. We're not going to reimagine any changes to that. The idea is that this is exactly where the intersection and the lights at the intersection exist right now, and work that into the concept itself. What we always try to do is you'll see on a lot of our slides on the right side is these little images of ideas of materiality and precedents. Some of them are some of our own projects. Some of them are potentially some of Devmont's other projects, and some of them are just projects that kind of give a good precedence, as we would say, of the potential of materiality and experiences. Next slide. This is a slide looking on top of the 3rd floor amenity space, which is on top of the parkade. That kind of looks at the potential use of that space for green space, patios, community gardens, gathering areas, and so forth. As mentioned, one thing that we'll show you also in the site plan is that we've taken quite a bit of care to make sure that the edges, and certainly as they face the south properties, that there's a significant green space between the edge and where these amenity spaces begin, so that there's absolutely no chance of any overlook and even to mitigate sound as people are on top of this amenity space. Next slide. Again, another slide of the amenity space. Next slide. This is an aerial shot that kind of shows you the concept of that space and how you can see the transitions down to the rear. Again, what was important when we looked at this project was that we wanted to ensure to keep that 10-meter buffer zone. And under zoning, we actually can build underneath technically, but we actually with the garage space. But what we wanted to ensure is the growth of trees and the potential to allow large trees to grow in that space. And so we've actually made sure that any parking structure below ground is actually not within these buffer zones, whether it's the one here on the south or the one that's kind of onto the northeast side of the property where we have actually a natural grading ditch there. So we wanted to make sure that all those pieces are kept as part of the project. The idea for the two-story parkade, especially facing the south, is to clad it with growing vegetation, so that it also contributes to that green buffer to the neighbors as well. As you can see, there is quite a bit of space, of green space, between the south edge of that parkade on the roof to where new amenity uses are, to allow that space to happen. Next slide. Just a view at the entry, at the arrival points. Next slide. Another view. Next slide. A site plan that kind of shows you, again, unlike what we showed in that aerial shot, again, the 10-meter buffer zone at the bottom. The building's transitioning down, the extent of green space, and the dimensions that you get to see. And so, as mentioned, the tower is located at the deepest part of this lot, which is quite a deep lot, and still alone over 50 meters to the property line. I think you can see pretty clearly, from that initial concept, that we really tried to minimize asphalt on the property, and really use a lot of the space to be either building or green space to limit heat island effect and stuff like that. Next slide. And just we'll run through these ones pretty quickly just to kind of show some of the plans. So this is the underground garage. Next slide. Level 1, which includes the partial parkade at level 1. Level 2, yeah, this is level 2 now. Next slide. Level 3, which would have that green amenity space. And then we can go through the next slide, and then next slide as it starts to transition. Yeah, so this is exactly, you start to see the building start to transition. Next slide. Next slide. And then the tower footprint. Next slide. A quick cross section of Hazeldean. It's a bit of a challenge. So we tried to take it at a moment in time, or not a moment in time, but in this particular spot on the plan, because the site is not rectangular. Obviously, it's a bit of a trapezoid shape. So here you can see that it's cut right through the 9-story building, over the green space. And then you can see beyond the tower to the property line is just 50.5 meters. And then the 7-story is 30 meters, and you can see the green buffer zone. That you can see that nothing kind of is built into that buffer zone. Next slide. As mentioned, the 45 angular plane is a guideline and a tool used to kind of help looking at design, but it's not an all-out requirement to say that, okay, you have to stay completely 100% under it. The idea is that you use this as a guide to see if you're actually close with regards to how transitioning is happening. And we actually used it as part of our design tool from the get-go. Obviously, some of it is within that plane, but because we're well over 50 meters, we felt that was more than ample space for the transition. Next slide. And then just some quick concept slides that we worked with the landscape architect as well to kind of look at all of these conditions, whether it's the streetscape from materiality and bike lanes and tree lanes and paver patterns, to other green and public amenity spaces that are happening. Next slide. To the entry, how do we start looking at the entries and how they interact with the green landscaping? Next slide. To what kind of helped initially start the idea of the amenity terrace as well. Next slide. I guess, yeah, some cross sections that we were looking at. Next slide. The green buffer zone, and also the cross section at the eastern part where we have the natural drainage bed. Next slide. Some shadow studies. So the way we kind of look at shadow studies, the City of Ottawa actually provides a guideline for what they require for shadow studies. It's actually the final document which is submitted. I think it's close to 43 pages long of shadow studies that we provide. But in these presentations, we obviously don't want to show you 43 pages worth. We kind of look at 3 type of dates. We look at summer and winter solstice, June 21st, December 21st. And then we look at the other dates kind of halfway in between, which is September 21st. And I think we're coming up on the next one fairly soon. I think it's in March. So, which are almost virtually identical as far as the shadow projections. And so from there, we kind of look at three times a day, morning, midday, and then into the afternoon, and kind of gives you a sense of how this is happening. I know there's a lot of big worry that all of a sudden, this is going to, all the shadows are going to go on to the neighbors. But the reality is that the sun is actually, the buildings are actually on the north side of the property. And so, for the most part, all the shadows are actually kind of hovering, as you can see there, across the street and then to the existing property to the northeast and stuff. Yeah, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be some shadows as they kind of hit later in the day, specifically, obviously, when the shadows are a little bit longer in the wintertime. That's going to happen, but it's pretty minimal. And so for the most part, these are kind of the key times. But like I said, we do have an extensive shadow study that's been done. Next slide. That's it.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That's a lot of info. Miguel, is that it for your presentation?
It is. We'll just handle the transportation through Q&A.
Okay. All right. That's a lot of information. We're going to go now into the Q&A. So once again, if you have a question, there's a couple ways that you can ask your question. One is you can put your hand up on Zoom, and we'll bring you into our Zoom meeting, and you can ask that question directly, or you can use the Q&A panel. I know a lot of people using that Q&A panel, so that's good. Kara from my team is helping us out tonight, moderating some of the questions. And what we'll try to do, at least from the start, is we'll go to someone with a hand up, and then we'll go to one of the written questions, and we'll just kind of alternate back and forth. And to the extent that we can, we will try to group some of the written Q&A, because I know there's some duplication there. So the first person with their hand up is Tim. Tim, it's going to ask you to unmute, and then the floor is yours.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Tim.
The one thing that nobody talked about is during the construction of this, because I live fairly close, is blasting. Now, when they built Sobeys behind us, which is now Farm Boy, we had some structural damage from the blasting. There were some minor cracks, but I don't know if you watched CTV News last night, but there was a clip on some construction that's going on in Brockville right now, and some of the people that live really close to that, they're concerned because the blasting that's happening is more than what they expected, and nobody's ever going to know if their foundation is being compromised. And it could be a couple of years after the construction is built, and all of a sudden they develop leaks in their basements. I mean, that's one of my concerns. And the other thing is, when I look out my back window, I am backed onto Farm Boy. I'm 3 houses in from Hazeldean Road, and I back onto Farm Boy. And if I look out my window in the morning, I see sunrise. This building, even the 9-story building, will completely block sunrise for me. And other questions include things like Carp Road isn't even 4 lanes. That was supposed to have been done a while ago, and when it got canceled, and it's just not going to be the current infrastructure that's there can't support another 400 residents. And
so Tim, I'm going to pause you there because I want to let the applicants answer your question about blasting, and just trying to limit questions to one at a time for our first round through, so we can hear from as many people as possible.
Sure.
So we'll start with blasting. Miguel, if you can direct that to anyone in your team.
Well, maybe I'll start really quickly, and then if anybody wants to supplement. So first off, this is a zoning bylaw amendment application, so it's to really change the rules of construction. You heard Patricia say there will be a future application, which is a site plan control application. That application is much more technical. I don't know if the guys are in a position yet to advise the construction techniques, and they probably won't know that till site plan, as to whether they need to blast, hole ram, excavate, do all those things. That will really come out through the more technical application, but you can take comfort that the city has a series of bylaws that protect communities through construction, which most of the time what happens is the consultants will do a pre and post blasting survey if it were to be blasted. And we don't know that yet, but where they will go in and ask permission and film and monitor and take samples and do all the things they do, and then compare it with the post construction. They may ask you to install some monitoring devices. That's not uncommon to monitor how the construction is progressing. But there's also a whole other series of bylaws that control the hours of operation or the hours of construction. There are bylaws that regulate dust, like for instance, they're supposed to spray down the trucks before they enter a municipal road. They have to reinstate municipal property or any abutting properties that are damaged. Like there's a creek corridor to the east of it that will have to be fenced off so that there's no potential materials or any damage to that creek area. So the city does have a series of bylaws and obligations to protect existing neighborhoods from construction. We're still a long way from that because we haven't submitted site plan, but all of those things are going to be relevant to protecting your peace of mind. With respect to shadowing, the city does have a criteria to how to assess shadow impacts. Development, especially on corridors like this that you heard Patricia say, projected building heights are really up to 40. So they're, communities will change and there will be some shadowing on abutting properties. And that's as a result of living in proximity to the corridors that are identified for greater height. The third question was, and I may not be best suited to answer it, but
I think it was around transportation, but we have a number of questions on that front, so we'll get back to that one as we go. I was
maybe I can just add on. Sorry, Councillor. Just to kind of help clarify also on the blasting part. Right now I think our geotech, which I just had Cassandra take a look at just to confirm. We're not even reaching bedrock at 4 meters, right? And I think it's one of the reasons we chose to only go one floor of parking is that we're likely not going to be blasting anything, right? But whatever the ultimate foundation system is decided, as Miguel said, the city will require us to provide a mitigation plan as part of that when we get into the building permit process and stuff. So we get it. We know it's if anything gets to a point where whether it is blasting or it is piles or anything like that has to be applied, the city will require us to provide a mitigation plan for those to make sure that if anything does shift or as a result of shift as a result of construction, then that the plan is there to address it for sure.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to Kara, who has one of our questions from the Q&A panel.
Hi, this is from Tony, and it's for you, Councillor. Glenn, how far west of Carp Road does the designation of major corridor apply since it's all rural highway configuration? Should this designation stop east of Carp Road once Carp Road is upgraded? And there have also been several questions about when is Carp Road being upgraded? So this would be a good opportunity for that as well.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask Patricia if you can scroll back in the deck to the map that shows all the Main Street corridors. But Hazeldean Road itself in the official plan is designated as a Main Street corridor. You'll see it approximately to Kittiwake and West Ridge. That's the westernmost segment of it. So it's designated as such, but obviously that stretch of the road hasn't been upgraded. There's still a ditch on the south side of the road, so it does need upgrades to urbanize it. As for a timeline for Carp Road, we are looking at 2025 for construction to begin on Carp Road, and that would be expanding it from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, so 2 lanes in each direction, plus a multi-use pathway on either side for pedestrians and cyclists and so on, plus upgrades to all of the intersections, including the intersection at Carp and Hazeldean Road. So 2025 is the anticipated start date for construction on that. So thank you, Tony, for your question. Going to go back to our hands up. We have Oliver is the next with your hand up. If you can unmute, Oliver. Oliver, you should see a prompt to unmute if you're able to click on that. Otherwise, we can come back to you in a moment. Okay, I'm going to go back. Kara, if we can take another question from the Q&A, and then we'll go back to our hands up.
Anonymous would like to know, how will you mitigate birds flying into all the windows? Will there be bird strike measures?
Miguel, can you take that one? Bird safe guidelines?
I'll take it. Probably easier for me to take it. Yeah, so the City of Ottawa does have some bird safe guidelines. The big thing with these types of projects, with mitigating for bird strikes, is really about looking at that first kind of 3 to 4 stories. Is kind of, I would even say 2 to 4 stories is kind of, because that's really the canopy line, right? And the idea is that what you want to do is limit as like huge expanses of glass, right? Where it becomes this big wall that reflects the 2 things. It reflects the sky, and it also reflects, but most importantly, it reflects the trees behind you or the vegetation. So that's where the birds get confused. And so anywhere where we have, let's say, and it's really at our ground floor entry lobbies where we have large expanses of glass, is that what we would provide is then a fritted glass, which has basically these dots or patterns in the glass that we would provide. So from the outside, you really don't notice it all that much, but the birds do notice it as they get close to the building and actually veer off from those walls. The buildings themselves are probably close to maybe 35% of window to wall ratio, which is pretty typical of new apartment buildings now because of the sustainability requirements. You know, the idea of the big glass towers for residential buildings is really starting to disappear just because they won't even meet the OBC, like the Ontario Building Code requirements for sustainability. And so, and those were the ones that were really the ones that were dangerous for bird strikes on glass, because you have these big giant glass towers. We don't have that here. And so usually it becomes a problem when you start hitting north of 45%, you know, of window to wall ratio. And so we're not going to be there for the upper parts of the buildings at all. So it's just really that those ground floor entry lobbies where we do have obviously vegetation as part of our landscaping strategy. We have trees and all that kind of stuff. But we will be looking at using fritted glass in those cases to help with bird strikes.
Okay, thank you. Going to try again to go back to Oliver. Oliver, if you're able to unmute, we can go to you. Maybe having some technical difficulties. Okay. Oh, Oliver, are you there?
It's okay, thanks. I don't
you
know how it got raised, so no worries. I have a question for the moment.
You don't have a question for a moment? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go to our next speaker then is Dean. Dean, you should be able to unmute and welcome.
Hi, folks. Can you see me all right?
We can hear you. I don't think the camera's activated, but we can hear you. So go ahead.
Okay, well, that works. So thanks for hosting this, Counselor, and thanks for the presentation. I have quite a few thoughts on this that I want to just share quickly. First, you know, I'm very supportive of this project here. I think it's a great spot to add some density. I think you're doing some very important work in the community. In particular, you know, I think of the fact that this amount of units is going to add tens of millions of dollars in development charges to this neighborhood and millions of dollars in property taxes every year. That's going to go right back to the community. It's going to come back to the community through improved roads, transit, libraries, sewers, garbage, and it really is going to be a huge benefit to the surrounding community. So I'm really supportive of that. I'm a bit disappointed we lost the ground floor retail. I'm confused as to why city staff pushed back on that. So I'm a bit disappointed there. My main frustration with this project, to be honest, is why we're still using such dated planning principles that most cities are getting rid of. So, you know, the whole concept of angular planes here, we're really losing potentially hundreds of units on this site because of shadows. And, you know, in 2024, in the middle of a housing crisis where the cost of housing has doubled or worse, whether you're renting or paying a mortgage or somewhere in between, you know, the fact that someone's view might supersede the ability for someone to have a place to live. You know, it just seems like it's not a sound planning principle in 2024, and I know a lot of cities are moving to get rid of those. I'm also concerned about the parking. I don't really understand why we still have parking minimum standards in Ottawa. Big cities like Toronto are moving to get rid of parking minimums. If we're going to have good transit in this neighborhood, which, you know, it seems like is coming, you know, why are we forcing parking on people who may not necessarily want it? The other piece that I want to talk about is, you know, I know there's a lot of people here tonight who are probably upset about this because it is a big change for the neighborhood, and I totally understand that. But when we look at the official plan, when we look at Main Street corridors, we're talking about 40 stories. So if we don't build 25 stories here today, well, not today, but in this process, you know, an application 5 years from now could be 40 stories. So, you know, I think this is a decent middle ground here. But I'd really like to understand from both the city and the developer's perspective, like, why are we still doing angular planes in 2024? Why are we eliminating the capacity to build housing here? I just think of, you know, if we had twice as many units here by getting rid of the angular plane, I mean, that's tens of millions of dollars more for this community that could be a huge benefit to everyone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dean. So we'll take those as comments. Kara, let's go to another Q&A question.
Sure. Charles would like to know, how large is the recreation area behind the building? There's a pool, but are there tennis or pickleball courts?
I can answer. I can't give you directly right now what the area is specifically. I don't think we have a drawing here, but maybe one of my staff will take a quick look. But there is no, just to put everybody at ease, there is no pickleball courts on this or tennis courts. I know that's pickleball is that new, you know, red line of noise and that kind of stuff. So there is none on that. It's the upper terrace for the most part is there is a pool, but mostly it's gathering spaces, it's patio spaces. There is community gardens, that kind of stuff. It's outdoor amenity space certainly for the tenants, but there is no, you know, tennis courts or pickleball courts on this at all.
Okay, thank you, Charles, for your question. We're going to go to Ian, who has his hands up. Ian, if you can unmute.
Thank you, Councillor Gower.
Welcome.
I come from the fact that I used to be a member of the Ottawa Committee of Adjustment. And what I see here is just so typical of what's happened in the past. When I first saw this proposal, and I could have written a book I recall a comment from Robert Oppenheimer, who was the inventor of the A-bomb. I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. And this is what I see from this monolith that they want to put up. Indeed, in the Community Voice, our local paper, Councillor Gower, I believe you said, planners come up with strategies to avoid sprawling further into farmland and natural areas. This is a massive sprawl, and you take a look at Fernbank, Abbott, Shea, Hazeldean, Highway 416 on the east side from Manotick, north of the Amazon warehouse, more houses, more spreading. I get it. We have to have development, but does it have to so exceed what is standard? And Devmont wants to go from 15 meters to 77 meters. For those of us who are still stuck in the old fashion, that's 49 feet. They want to go to 263 feet. That's a hell of a jump. And I'm really against that. It doesn't mean it has to be accepted. I know the city has to listen to them. They have to consider it. But do they, as in past times, and as I said, I used to be a member of the Committee of Adjustment, what we didn't pass, they took to the city, and the city just laid back and passed it. Developers these days, and let me be blunt, they circle like vultures over roadkill. And as soon as they see something empty, they go down on it. And then they develop, and I'm very familiar with FOTEN for years and years and years through the Committee of Adjustment. Those are the hired guns that they'll bring in to convince everyone of what's happening. Forgive me, but that's the way it is. I've lived in this city for 67 years. And again, the city never listens to the ordinary person. I'm sorry, I know that for a fact. Somebody brought up the question about infrastructure. Drive along Hazeldean. On the right-hand side, past the Red Barn, is a new street, Mantra Street. I think everyone's familiar with it. The development just to the south, did they extend a road? No, they built an ordinary road, and you get all the traffic from the development on Mantra Street, pours onto Hazeldean with not one iota of infrastructure rebuilding. Environmental impact, apparently OC transport is going to be improved. Well, they're not doing too well right now as we speak, and I'll believe it when I see it. This is bad, folks. And the fact, Councillor Gower, and I will finish here, and thank you so much for your time. The fact that you've got almost 300 people here, I suspect 99% of them don't want this. We're the ones that count, not the folks downtown. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ian, for your comments. Was not expecting an Oppenheimer reference tonight, but thank you, Ian, for sharing that with us. Kara, let's go to a Q&A question, please.
Sure. This one's for you. With limited transit service at this time, does a reduction in parking space ratio make sense? And this is from an anonymous. What are the normal conditions the city looks for when approving a reduction in the ratio of parking spaces?
Yeah, I wrote a post on my website about parking. If folks want to check that out, to glengower.ca. They're seeking a reduced rate of parking here. I think the city would be looking at where it's located. Is it in on a street that's well served by transit? Is it in an area where there's shopping services and other amenities that are walkable and nearby? The city's official plan does encourage and allow for reduced parking where the conditions in the area would support that. So mainly around serviceable by transit and walkability. So those would be the factors that planners will be looking at as they evaluate this request from the applicant. So thank you, Anonymous, for that question. We'll go to Lee, who has her hand up.
Hello, thank you.
Hi,
Just
Lee.
pulling up my notes here.
Yes.
Oh crap, where did that go? Hi folks, my name is Lee Honeywell. I'm a resident of River Ward, a little bit to the east, and I grew up in Ottawa, so not quite the 67 years, but closing in on 40. I'm a volunteer board member of the community nonprofit Make Housing Affordable. No relation to the developers or financial stake in this project or any real estate projects. I just like density and want us to build more housing. I wanted to speak in favor of this application. As everyone knows, we're in a climate crisis globally and a housing crisis locally. This is a great development near lots of amenities, and I'm really excited to see more density in Stittsville instead of just sprawl, although I think the previous speaker was maybe a little bit unclear on what sprawl means. Sprawl costs the city more than the development charges it contributes. This building will not, and as my friend Dean mentioned, we'll be bringing a ton of development charges and property taxes to the local community. I wanted to specifically speak about the parking. I know folks that are in single family homes often are like, how does anyone survive without a car? I spent nearly 2 decades as an adult without owning one. I used public transit and biked everywhere. Obviously, we have a ways to go as a city, but density is how we get there. How we make transit better is by having more dense housing. Not everybody needs or wants to have a car. And we don't need to build all housing to be car centric. The one other thing I really wanted to encourage folks that are opposed to this project to think about is the long term of their own residences. If you're in a single family home, are you going to age in place there? Or at some point, will you want to move to more accessible housing where you are? As our population ages in general, I think a lot of folks are going to be sad to find out. We've underbuilt multi-unit and accessible housing for decades. If folks want to stay in their neighborhoods, we got to start building more multi-unit housing. And I think this building is going to really importantly contribute to folks being able to age in place. So in summary, I really support this development, and I hope folks that live close to it will be welcoming to their future neighbors. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Lee, for your comments. Carol, go to the Q&A.
Jen has a two-part question. She says that the area cannot support the infrastructure proposed by this development. What is the proposal for utilities for this development, e.g. stormwater, water, sewer, hydro? And 2, Hazeldean Road is not currently equipped for increased traffic, but it has no bike lanes past Carp Road, no bus service. What is the proposed timelines for improvement?
So I can answer the Hazeldean Road in part, and then we can go to the infrastructure question. So Hazeldean Road, west of Carp Road, is designated in the official plan as a minor corridor. And it's the city's going through another process called the Transportation Master Plan, in which they're evaluating all of the roads in the city and what the requirements are for growth over the next 25 years. And the segment of Hazeldean Road, west of Carp, so between Carp and Westridge, Kittiwake, is one of the roads that's being evaluated to determine what the requirements are. Does it need to be upgraded to 2 lanes in each direction? What kind of sidewalk and bicycle infrastructure is required? Any changes to signalizations at the intersections and so on. So that's the timeline for that to be reviewed. As to when that gets built, that's not determined yet. However, I should say, clearly there needs to be a sidewalk that connects this development to the rest of the pedestrian network, and that would be built at the time that this apartment would be built if it's approved. So it's not a case where the people living here wouldn't have safe access to other parts of the pedestrian network in this part of Stittsville. As for infrastructure and utilities, I know that's partially reviewed through zoning, partially through site plan. Miguel, I don't know if you can give any flavor to any studies you've already done in terms of capacity for stormwater, hydro, other utilities.
Yeah, so just very quickly, and on the issue of the sidewalk, I don't think it's surprising that the south side of Hazeldean doesn't have a sidewalk. It's characterized by 2 vacant parcels and one that is being used as something that doesn't warrant pedestrian investments. But as these properties develop, and they develop in keeping with the official plan, with residential densities, potentially more high-rise and mid-rise buildings, then the city has an interest in urbanizing that section of Hazeldean. But right now, it shouldn't be surprising that it's underserved from a sidewalk perspective. With the servicing, we are required to submit it's called a adequacy of public service study. So that was submitted to the city, and the city will provide us comments. Just in very general terms, no property can adversely drain onto someone else's property. Each property has to control their drainage, so there would never be any flooding issues to abutting properties. The study will determine if there needs to be upgrades to some of those public facilities for potable water, sanitary. And I mentioned earlier that there is another application, which is the much more technical site plan application. That is when those systems are designed if needed. That also goes for transportation improvements. So I'll leave it to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jan, for your question. We're going to go now to Daniel. Daniel, if you can unmute.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yes.
So I'll try to keep it somewhat brief. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and I guess I'll just start with saying, you know, the design of the building is beautiful. It offers a lot for a community. However, I think a lot of people will agree the scale is just wacko. For this part of the city, you know, we're talking about the farthest west point of a city, and I get the idea of intensification and building. We're in a unique situation right now where the government is pushing for this, and it's a good thing. But we should be doing it right. We shouldn't have to look back in 10 years and be like, what the hell was that? Why is that built there? You know, we talk about walkable neighborhoods, creating walkable neighborhoods, but where this building is being proposed, that just isn't possible. You know, you go 500 meters west and you're in a marshland. You know, buildings like this should be built where within that 1,000-meter buffer, you know, the 15-minute neighborhood, there should be everything there, or at least the opportunity for it to be there. You know, where are you going to put a sports complex? You know, because this building is going to set a precedent for the trailer dealership next to it, and then the remaining open land. So if you're looking into the future, there's no space for anything. And the existing commercial that everyone, you know, on paper, yes, there's commercial, but we're talking about a farm boy, a little larger than a convenience store, that is a very niche building. People who are going to be renting lower income housing aren't going to be looking for organic meats and organic chips. And then what? Your walkable destination is going to be a landscaping company or a Tim Hortons. Or you're going to walk through this huge parking lot to, you know, to Kung Fu Bistro. Like, these aren't walkable destinations. There's no space for larger amenities. The train is never going to come this far, and it may not even make it down to Hazeldean at all, you know, with the state of the train now. You know, everyone says, well, build it and things will come. I agree to an extent. You know, there's something on paper like this, you're checking some boxes, but in reality, it just doesn't work. You know, these people are going to be landlocked. They can't walk to a school. There is a school sort of close, but it's at capacity, and you can't walk to it from this location. So that, I think these are a lot of things that the people who are going to live in this community are going to have an issue with. So I don't know if the developer can comment on that, if they actually walked the area and looked at it, and also if the city is going to take these things into consideration. You know, there's one thing to do with being on paper, but what does that look like in reality? And, you know, I think, like I said before, there's a unique opportunity here to build good and to build lots. But I think building good has to be at the forefront, or we're going to be in the same position we are now, where we just rushed something, one idea, and didn't look at the big picture of how it's going to look for everybody around, including the residents of this development. I guess that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. I'm going to take that as a comment, and we do want to get through as many questions and comments as possible here. So, Kara, can we go to one of our Q&As?
Sure. Anonymous is asking, will we ever see any noticeable improvements in transit such that people living in this complex will actually not need a car since there's so little parking? And our transit system is horrible. No streets in Stittsville are well served by transit.
Yeah, so I'll answer that really quickly. Right now, this is a poor location for transit. During most of the day, you have Route 61 that operates every 30 minutes. It's a little more frequent in rush hour, and there's also Route 262. This spring, OC Transpo is launching a new route network, and there are going to be 6 buses per hour in both directions serving this part of Hazeldean Road, Hazeldean near Carp. So that would mean about every 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes for buses. So that is a significant improvement. So this part of Stittsville moving to OC Transpo's frequent network, which is a major upgrade. I'm trying to answer quickly because I do want to get to as many people and questions as we can, and we have a big queue here. So we'll go back to Ashley.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Ashley.
Hi, so I live in the Crossing Bridge neighborhood. I'm within 500 meters of this development, and while there are only 300 on this call, I think there's about 700 members in a community group that oppose this development application. So I'm not sure you missed the mark, or you hit the mark here. I have no concerns with Hazeldean as a Main Street corridor. I take public transit from Stittsville, and I also support adding density when it's well planned. But I feel that there are other ways on this lot to accommodate density. When I look at this development, I'm very concerned about the lack of thought that's gone into the impact that this will have on the neighborhood beyond the properties that are most closely connected to the project and those major throughways. So you mentioned in the opening comments that Hazeldean is supposed to have a different character, but you don't live in this community, nor do the lobbyists who've been favorable to this proposal who've been on the call this evening. And I get the feeling that you've not spent much time here. So this development will have a major impact on the surrounding community because of the inadequate infrastructure, which is identified in the reports that you've produced, or because it's based on future infrastructure that's yet to materialize. This is a neighborhood that is established. It's been here between 20 and 40 years old. There's mature trees. It's a neighborhood that was built as estates in a rural area that's 30 kilometers from downtown. It's not planned to accommodate a density, and I'm concerned with traffic safety on streets like Hoban and Renshaw. My children walk to school on the road because there's no sidewalks on my street. So it's not just Hazeldean. The entire neighborhood is built this way. So this development is based on traffic, this development based on the traffic study findings is likely to send more cars down those streets, and I don't see that noted in your report. To your comments about transit, there's 2 buses that can get me downtown reliably. Glenn, you mentioned them. I have to drive to Eagleson each day, and there's no transit access here for a building of this nature. There's no plans for transit for many years to come, which someone else mentioned. The result, you don't have enough parking for the current car dominant community you're building in. You've mentioned you're trying to attract families. Sports and recreation almost all happen in rural areas in this community because we're so far west. So I would like to understand the work that's been done to extend those studies just beyond that first row of homes. The studies and design visuals in this application are directed to the immediate area and seem to speak to the short-term impacts only. I can't fully appreciate the impact of your proposal on the broader neighborhood based on what's been submitted, which I would view as short-sighted and inadequate as a result. I don't feel that you understand this community differs from how things are different in a city like Montreal or even other streets within Ottawa. Perhaps it's a comment, but I think just generally we're talking about a very narrow space, and I would like to see a bit more broadly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ashley. I wanted to pick one thing you mentioned there. You were wondering why Hoban Street was not evaluated as part of the traffic study, and might be a good opportunity for Andrew to give us a bit more context about the scope of that traffic study and what is or is not included.
Sure, thank you, Councillor. I'll be pretty quick on this answer. Is that Hoban wasn't really considered as a cut-through route for travel to and from this, or it's a destination for people from this site. That's more focused onto Hazeldean and Carp and Stittsville, Maine. Even I saw some comments about parking on the adjacent streets, and we didn't consider that as well, just based on the walking distance to get around. It's not a very convenient spot to infiltrate from, and we're not going to have those connections from Hazeldean through to that part of the community to, that would potentially encourage that, but permeability is sometimes a positive for these developments if it's possible. So we can take those away and go back to staff and discuss with the councillor's office as well with the rest of the comments in here. So it's something we can look at, and if there's value from staff and the councillor's office to look at it again, we can definitely take that under consideration.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Ashley. We've noted your comments and concerns from your feedback. Kara, let's go back to our Q&A.
Sure. Christine would like to know, what's the proposed timeline for the new development?
Miguel, can you answer that one?
I mean, generally in terms of the approvals, by the time we get to planning committee, we're probably 4 or 6 months away from planning committee. There's a site plan application that's required as well. That site plan application usually takes 8 to 10 months on average. There's the ability to stagger it as well. Actually, I should be a little more optimistic in terms of going to planning committee. We could probably get there within 3 to 4 months. And then the site plan, would take some time after that. The city can't provide site plan approval until you have the zoning in place. So the applications are typically staggered, and then there would be a lot of work on behalf of the developer. So I'm going to say probably 1 to 2.5 years away from construction.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. And we'll go to Stuart. Stuart, if you can unmute and share your comments or question.
Hi, Glenn. A couple things. So I just heard a gentleman say that the traffic won't be impacted on Hoban Street. So I live in Echo Woods. Just like we were told that the traffic from Kimpton wouldn't impact us at all. Pardon my language, but that's a crock. Anybody living in this high rise is going to go to independent grocers, Crossing Bridge Square, Main Street. It's going to have an impact. Nobody has truly thought this out. I'm not against development. I'm all for it. I'm a construction worker by trade, but we got to put a little bit more time and effort into making sure the infrastructure is there prior to doing this stuff.
Okay, thank you, Stuart, for sharing that comment. Go back to our Q&A, Kara.
It's not really a comment.
Well, so it's a question.
Well, tonight there's been a whole lot of people asking what I feel are legitimate questions, and they keep getting put off as comments.
So you're asking, so rephrase it for me, Stuart, as a question, and we can have one of the people from the applicant team answer.
Okay, so
Whoops.
We really need to put a little bit more thought into the traffic planning. So I guess my main question is, who actually did the traffic study, and did they actually consult the neighborhood to figure out whether or not these actually have an impact? Me personally, with Kimpton, I've almost been killed about 5 times because no one stops at stop signs. So I'm truly concerned about another, 500 and some units coming in?
Okay, Miguel or Andrew?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I did the traffic study. I did the traffic study for the first submission as well. So I didn't hear these comments the first time around. So I'm glad we're getting them now at least. The scope of the traffic work is well defined by the city. We have a pretty rigid terms of reference and scope of work we have to do in analyzing major intersections and routes within a kilometer of the site. And that even sometimes it is expanded, sometimes it gets shrank, but I think we're pretty much consistent with the 1 kilometer study area for both the previous and the current submission. The time frame of the day, which the city is most concerned about for operations and functioning of the road network is the AM and the PM peak hours. So especially for a residential development, if it was commercial, we'd have Saturdays as well. So that's what the scope of the TIA traffic impact assessment covers, assesses the major intersections, and uses all the trip generation stuff from the city, area, modal shares, like how people are traveling based on city survey and city published rates, as well as all the data was collected from the City of Ottawa for existing intersections and signal timing. So it's kind of a distillation of a lot of the stuff the city has gathered and given to us and laid out on how to do it. And then they review that for, technical, make sure it's up to par on the technical side, and as well as we're not missing anything else that they've heard, either from, like 311 messages or, issues being raised, or through the counselor's office as well. So to date, there hasn't been any outstanding concerns passed along to us. So again, now that we're getting these, we can definitely take it up and discuss with the counselor's office and staff to see if there's something else we can do.
Thank you. Yeah, so the traffic study is still being reviewed by city staff. And thank you, Stuart, for sharing that. Kara, back to Q&A.
Sure. Jamie would like to know, how will this impact the schools in the area? It has taken us almost 15 years to get a public secondary school in the city of Stittsville. If every unit has a child, this will overflow the school system. We do not have a bus service right now, and this will seriously impact child safety and the learning environment.
Maybe I could answer that quickly. So the province manages schools and the construction of schools, and it's kind of a let's call it a lagging indicator. Usually schools aren't funded until the existing schools are very close to capacity. I don't want to sell the school board short. They do have people who look at demographics and growth patterns and so on. But in my experience, schools in our area tend to lag quite a bit. You'll see schools with quite a few portables before new schools are approved by the province for funding. And I think going back at least 15 years, every new home that has been sold in Stittsville, there's a notice on the agreement of purchase and sale indicating that there are capacity issues with public schools in our area. So it is a big concern of mine. And it's one of the things I've been encouraging residents to write to your local MPP. There is a lot of growth happening in Ottawa, obviously, and in Ontario. I have a lot of concerns about some of the provincial services like doctors, like schools, and the province's plan to make sure that they can keep up with the population growth that we're seeing. So it's a good point. Thank you, Jamie. Going to go back to people with their hands up. I see Peter. Peter, if you can unmute.
Yep. Good evening.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation and hosting. So a couple points, and I don't want to point fingers, but I didn't appreciate Dean Tester's and Leah's comments. I mean, if you Google the names, they're big sales pitches, affordable housing. And I probably can go so far to say they don't live within a kilometer of this site. And I do agree with some of the comments from people that are living in the neighborhood or within 500 meters of the site, that it is quite the monstrosity for this end of the city. And the furthest point from the city of Ottawa, or downtown Ottawa. So I ask myself, why would they want to build these dense high-rise buildings in what was farmland a few years ago? And the only conclusion I have is the land here is cheaper than closer to downtown, where transitway exists and where normal walking infrastructure exists. And I think I was trying to, I like the glossy presentations. They look pretty to me, and they look beautiful. I'd like to see them a kilometer down the road, either way, south or west, or south or east, but I know that's not going to happen. I think I would like to hear more about wastewater. I'd like to hear more about how we're going to have 500 more apartments on the current system and the current infrastructure we have in Stittsville. And the obvious question to me is when I see a 25-story high building, I think, well, where's the fire truck for that building? So who's paying for a new fire station that has a fire truck that can go up 25 floors? And I know Dean was big advocate on how much money it's bringing into the city, but that's just one example of many where it costs the city to have these kind of buildings in an area, in a remote area such as Stittsville. That's it.
Okay, thanks very much, Peter. So quickly on your question about fire services and other amenities, the city will be charging a development charge that goes towards infrastructure like police, fire, paramedics, libraries. Specific to fire, one of the steps in the review process, both in zoning bylaw, they'll be looking to make sure that there's adequate water service for firefighting. And then through the site plan process, there's a review by the fire services department and emergency services department to ensure that there's no concerns from an emergency services point of view. So that is part of the review process. So thank you, Peter, for raising those points. And Carol, go back to Q&A.
Sure. Anonymous would like to know, how many units will be deemed affordable housing? How long will your commitment be on to this?
Who can answer that from the applicant team?
I can jump in and answer. So the way we structure these projects right now is through CMHC financing, and they have the requirements for affordability. And so in order to get financing through CMHC, we have to meet those requirements. And typically we go for a minimum of 16 years to meet those criteria, which is basically at least 10% below market value.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to the anonymous question asker for that. We'll go to Stephen with his hand up.
Yeah, hi. I just had a number of comments. Really, higher density development's necessary. Everyone knows that, but it should be done according to the city's official plan. And if we're just going to seek waivers and deviations from that plan, then why have it? I mean, city staff put a huge amount of effort into developing that over the years with guidelines to keep construction and development in line with the infrastructure that the city has, and that fits and integrates well within the community surrounding. This does not. I mean, this building is 2.5 times higher than Stittsville highest landmark, the water tower. It's only 15 meters shorter than the Peace Tower. And we're going to park that right in a rural suburban community. The closest building that's over 60 meters high is the Brook Street Hotel. And that range covers out to 15 kilometers. You know, where are 431 households going to park their vehicles? And you can't just say they're all going to ride bikes. They're not going to have cars, or they're going to car share. Let's get real. We're a long ways out, and to get anywhere, even if you want to get over to Browns, you're going to have to take your car because the bus isn't going to get you there and it's too far to walk, right? So, you know, we don't even have one parking spot per unit. We have 0.9 according to this. Congestion, you know, widening Carp Road is not going to address the congestion problems. You know, getting from the highway to this intersection is only part of the problem. We already have traffic jams on Main Street, right? And speaking of which, the traffic study with Hoban, the other guy had it hit the nail right on the head. You know, the shortcut that everyone takes to avoid probably 3 or 4 lights is to turn right onto Hoban before Canada Trust and go all the way around and put you out on Main Street, down by the Main Street Hoban intersection, and you avoid probably 5 to 10 minutes of lights during a congestion period. That's going to put you right in front of Aylor and Cassidy, and too bad for the little kiddies crossing the road there, right? So I agree, you know, like you can't just say, well, it's not a major thoroughfare. It will become one. You know, and my other concern is who's going to manage this building after it's built? You know, building it's one thing, but managing it and keeping it maintained and, you know, keeping things in order, that's a problem. You know, like, you know, I'm thinking of like the notorious ice towers that were supposed to be high-end residential development in the waterfront in Toronto, and they're not desirable places. They're high crime zones right now. You know, things change and development happens, and hopefully we have plans for smart development. This isn't smart. I think it fundamentally changes the character of this neighborhood for the worst. I'm 600 feet from this as crow flies, and I know now that instead of looking at the sunset, I'm going to be looking at a building that rises to about 25 degrees above the horizon, that is 3 times maybe higher than all the houses around. It's going to be a real eyesore, and it just doesn't fit the character of the neighborhood. It should be built somewhere on a high traffic density corridor on the LRT route. It's more suited for downtown. It's more suited for Yonge Street in Toronto than it is Hazeldean Road in Stittsville. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. I'm going to ask the applicant team to address a couple things. One is Stittsville Main Street traffic, and the other is the building management question. So how about Stittsville Main Street in terms of traffic study and Main Street? Andrew, any context?
Yeah, definitely. I want to point this out before we get too far down here. I know that there's a lot of comments about the height of the tower making the traffic be a major concern here. The actual, if you look at the previous study for the previous concept and this one, the ground floor retail contributed a significant number of trips to that concept. So in the morning, the 25 or the higher tower has about 30 more trips in the morning, but in the afternoon it's almost the exact same as the previous proposal, which we didn't get nearly as many comments about it at that time. So it seems to be a visual perception thing versus the numbers. Within the study, we did assess, actually, the previous study assessed Stittsville Main, but it was removed on this one. But at this, let me just pull up the number specifically for you. It got removed from the future assessments, but it was in the existing conditions in the trip assignment. Based on the travel patterns in Stittsville from the city's OD survey and trip generation manual and ME, the trans, the model and everything that we get to figure out how people are traveling to and from these sites. It's only 2 trips in the morning, 1 trip in the afternoon going down Carp Road, and maybe 1 trip coming back in the morning and 1 trip coming back in the PM back up to the site. So 3 total trips, 2-way volume along Carp Road down to Stittsville Main. So this is a very low impact during rush hour, which is the primary, probably the most frustrating time other than weekends for the commercial area, which is probably typical in most commercial corridors, but it's a very low impact on the peak hour for Stittsville Main.
I'll jump in for management. We stay owners of the buildings, and we have our own management team that manages our own property. And because it stays in the family, we take care of our properties. So not to be compared to the ICE towers in Toronto, which I believe were condominiums, which is totally different.
Miguel, I saw your hand pop up. Did you want to add something?
Well, just a few things, because I want to correct at least one statement that's not accurate, in that this proposal is fully in keeping with the policy direction of the official plan. It's the zoning that's out of step with those documents. That's not unreasonable, given that the official plan was just approved in November 2023. So what the application here is to recognize that the official plan encourages greater heights along these corridors. There is no change to the official plan. We are fully in keeping with that. The official plan provides direction as to how to do a good transition. It's also supplemented with design guidelines, as was noted, but we are fully in compliant with the policy documents. We're asking for relief from the zoning that's outdated. You also heard that the city is going to go through their own exercise citywide starting next March or April. So all of our communities are going to get changed from a zoning perspective, but We are ahead of that because we have a proposal that allows the city to assess whether they think or not that there is an adequate transition. On the parking issue, I want to make a few comments. We have 389 parking spaces. All these applications are typically directed to these corridors, and all of these applications, we are now reducing parking. Our parking rates are from 2008 that don't fully recognize some of the investments that the city has made into transit or changing trends. As an example, there are 4 electric vehicles proposed here to allow residents to not have a car and rely on those electric vehicles to accommodate their trips. You also heard, and this is my last comment, despite Daniel's comments earlier, this is actually a very walkable site. It's at a signalized intersection that has access to a food store, a Barley Mow, a beer store, a Tim's, all of those things. There's a reason Devmont selected this site, and it's not because the lands are cheaper, but rather 2 things. They are in excellent proximity to other amenity spaces, including 1 kilometer from Stittsville Main Street, but also the Stittsville community is largely characterized by low-rise residential as opposed to apartments. There's very little apartments in Stittsville, and it makes it very difficult for people to transition and stay in their communities. That's exactly why Devmont chose these properties. So I'll leave my comments to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Stephen, for your comments and questions. Carol, let's go back to our Q&A.
This is from Shannon. She said there was a comment about how this building will respect the privacy of the neighborhoods. How is a 25-story building going to respect the privacy of those living in Westridge, Timbersmere, and Crossing Bridge? We had a member fly a drone to show the view at various heights, and the impact on privacy is significant and concerning.
Miguel?
I'd like to start with that one. So when the city measures impacts, there's 2 layers of impacts. One is, what is the overlooking, the shadowing, and everything else, for instance, on the residents along Carl Avenue and Cratton Crescent? Like, what is the immediate impacts? Are the balconies oriented to their rear properties? Are they going to be experiencing the effects of the massing and the shadowing and all those things? Then there's a broader community, and you're not going to like my answer, but the ability to see a tall building is not an impact, or it's not a comparable impact to what could happen to the abutting property owners. And that's really why we look at those things differently. I get it. Some people don't like tall buildings. I can see several of them from my office, and I can see some from my house. But the reality is there are different layers of impacts, and we spent a lot of time to try to manage those on behalf of the abutting property owners. So if you remember the angular plane drawing, which is a measuring tool to help us assess that, what we did is remove volume from the, I don't know, Patricia, if you could go to that, we remove volume from the bottom portions of the building and put it on, no, back up to the angular plane, if you don't mind. Yeah, so for instance, the policies would allow taller buildings in closer proximity to the residential community to the rear. What we did was we removed some of that volume, which you can see in the voided areas and under the angular plane measurement, and put them on top. And yes, the effect is that a broader amount of people are going to be able to see the taller building from further away. But the positive impact is removing density and volume to the abutting property owners that may be more impacted by loss of privacy, overlooking, shadowing, and those kind of considerations. So I'll leave it to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Shannon, for your question. We're going to go to Janet with her hand up. Hi, Janet. If you can unmute, Janet. All right, I'm going to jump ahead to Brandon, and Brandon, you should be able to unmute. We'll try to come back to Janet after. Brandon, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm with Make Housing Affordable, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the concerns I've seen raised tonight and in the media in the past few days that the community just doesn't have the infrastructure for this, but this density is exactly how you get that. Having people there to serve with better transit, with better road access, with investments coming from the city into this community, it's easier when there's more people there to justify that investment. It's something that will help the community be better served across the board, having more neighbors, more residents available to both pay for those services and benefit from them. And I also want to speak, I live in Riverside South and nearby in Barrhaven in its town center in Barrhaven Marketplace, which also by coincidence happens to be a Faux10 design. We've been seeing this happening already. We've got several towers up already. We've got, new parking lots being replaced with old parking lots being replaced with new buildings. And it's really transforming that part of the city into a wonderful community where we had, dystopian parking wasteland before. And it's really starting to feel more alive, more of a wonderful place to go and shop and interact with your neighbors. And the traffic's not getting any worse. And we're seeing the impact on the city services. The city has moved up the realignment of Greenbank Road to better benefit all of Barrhaven by about 5 years. And that's something that they're able to do because Barrhaven is densifying, because we've got more people there benefiting from the services, because it's just something that is now prudent to do now instead of in the 2030s. And these are the things that Stittsville could have with projects like this going ahead. And it's something that should excite the community and not frighten it.
Okay, thank you, Brandon, for your comments. I'm going to try to go to Janet. Janet, if you're able to, you can unmute. All right, maybe having technical difficulties. Kara, let's go to another question and keep things going along here. Oh, you're on mute, Kara.
Sorry. There are a lot of questions. I'm just trying to.
There are a lot of questions. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I could not pronounce your name and I apologize. But this person asked, what would be the space from the face of the building to the property line? Asking, as mentioned before, 10-meter green buffer will disappear when Hazeldean will be widened to a 4-lane road with active transportation facilities like a bike lane, etc.
Okay, so it sounds like questions about the front, what the landscaping looks like, and if Carp Road is widened, what would be the impact on any landscaping? That's Roberto?
Yeah, so sorry, I just want to make sure the green buffer zone is from the back property line. Because I just want to make sure we talk about the correct things, and I'll address both Hazeldean and the back. So as you can see on the bottom of the page is a 10-meter buffer zone. And that idea is that we want to keep, the healthy, mature vegetation that's there, and then also ultimately plant more vegetation to help. But what we have is that 10 meters to allow for mature trees to actually grow, right? And so nothing is in that buffer zone, nothing above grade, nothing below grade. And so that way we have that ability, which is roughly around 30 plus feet, to allow much larger mature trees to grow in that area. And that is going to remain no matter whatever happens on Hazeldean. Right now, the Hazeldean has a right of way. I can't remember the exact number. I think it's probably in there. It's probably in the 20 plus meter to the center line road, kind of in that range, that we have to provide on our property. So it actually extends past the property line, and that will remain in place no matter what. Like, we cannot build to that line above or below grade, no matter what, to that right away. For all intents and purposes, that becomes a new property line. And again, the idea is that the city in the future will determine how to redesign Hazeldean Road. So right now, it's a drainage ditch. Right now, if you go on Google Street View, you'll see that it's a drainage ditch wherever there's like private access roads, like what there is now. you will see culverts that would go underneath that road to continue that ditch. And so what we have to do is we have to design right now our concept based on that. Like what actually goes in as an official application to the city has to remain based on that, because the city has no right now design plan specifically for this stretch of area. So, but the idea is that as things change with the look of Hazeldean, as different requirements are looked at, whether for its transportation from a pedestrian access or from OC Transport or whatever the case may be, the city will ultimately redesign Hazeldean Road. Now, unfortunately, we just don't know when. But the idea is that, even in our concept proposal, we're proposing to, fill that with as much mature trees as possible, and vegetation and bike paths and sidewalk lanes to allow that to become more of a pedestrian environment.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answered the resident's question who asked that. I just wanted to know, we're at 9 p.m. We were scheduled to stop at 9, but there are a lot of hands and a lot of questions. We may not be able to get to everyone tonight, and I know there's a lot of duplicate questions as well in the Q&A. We're going to try to go to 9:30 because we do have a hard stop at 9:30, but we will try to get to as many people as possible. I'm going to ask everyone on the applicant team to be concise and brief as possible with your answers, and to residents, if you can ask your question or share your comment as quickly as possible, that'd be great too, so we can get more people the chance to speak. We're going to go to Tiffany next. So if you can unmute.
Hi, yes, I'm going to jump in because I have a lot to say. So
Okay,
I'm curious if the developers have actually ever been to Stittsville, because based on your comments, it really sounds like none of you have ever been here. The city mentions in their official plan from section 4.6 that they need to enable sensitive integration of new developments to ensure Ottawa meets its intensification targets while considering livability for all. And another point in that section, they mention to minimize impacts on the neighborhoods, which you're just coming in with the bulldozer and you don't seem to care about anybody who lives here. Your pictures don't actually show the homes and yards. You had one for the angle. You very conveniently left my house out of that one. And I just don't get how you can justify putting a 25-story building where you're proposing it. This isn't downtown Ottawa. Glenn, you even mentioned we are a minor corridor. We are not a major corridor. There is no planned LRT stop to come this far down Hazeldean. So I'm sorry. The city, yes, we need to build, but we need to make smart choices using common sense. This feels like nonsensical and greedy. These are high-cost rental units, and if you actually cared about the housing crisis, then build affordable housing. I'm not done. And then it's been mentioned a few times, we need accessible housing. The lobbyists that keep commenting from make Ottawa affordable. They're fighting so hard for development and it's not affordable. I don't understand that the city paid you to be here, but this Stittsville is not a city. It is a village. This is a very friendly village. We are a close community and you're coming in to take that away. It does not make any sense. And then your comment, Miguel, on apartments. Did you actually check the availability of any rental units in Stittsville? Because there's new units on Main Street. Not all of them are taken. There's tons down Hazeldean near John Woods. Not all of them are full. They've lowered the price once or twice now. So you're coming in, you're saying we need more rentals. People don't want to rent here. Even in your development proposal, you mentioned young professionals. They don't want to live in Stittsville. They want to live near the city. It does not make any sense. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. I misspoke earlier. If I said Hazeldean was a minor corridor, it's a Main Street corridor as designated in the official plan. So I misspoke. And just out of fairness to, I think the group's called Make Housing Affordable. They are not paid by the city, and they're a community group, so they're not lobbyists. They're certainly not paid by the city. And as a public meeting, this is open to anyone. It's not limited to Stittsville residents, but just to clarify. But thank you, Tiffany, for your comments. And appreciate that you could join us today. Kara, let's go back to Q&A.
Okay, this one's from Tony, and it's for you, Councillor. Glenn, do you support or oppose the zoning change at this time? Do you agree or disagree that Hazeldean Road west of Carp requires significant upgrades of the transit along with Carp before it meets the definition of major corridor?
Okay, where to start on that? So in general, I don't have an issue with apartments or even taller buildings along a street like Hazeldean Road or Eagleson or March Road. It doesn't mean, though, that apartment buildings are appropriate in every location. And this is exactly what we're looking at and what planning staff need to look at. We have rules, we have guidelines, we have policies, municipal and provincial legislation that helps us decide what is appropriate. And residents have raised a lot of concerns here, and these are exactly what the city's looking at before anyone can make a yes or a no decision. I think part of what I'm trying to do with our planning staff is make sure that they are very aware of these concerns and the issues that are being raised, and that they're taking a look at this. So things like Carp Road, yes, it needs to be upgraded, and that's coming in 2025. OC Transpo, we've talked about that tonight. It does need big improvements to what's here. That's also coming later this year with the increase in bus service. The Hazeldean upgrade that is west of Carp Road, not as much certainty there as to when that happens. So that's something we need the clarity on. I think if you're asking, would I vote yes or no on this? Well, it's too early to say because we haven't completed that review. There's likely going to be a lot of back and forth between the planning staff and the developer before we get there. But I also don't want to create false impressions that I have the final say on this. This is a decision of City Council, and City Council needs to make a decision in light of municipal and provincial rules. And if we don't have good grounds for refusing something, the Ontario Land Tribunal overturns us. So we're taking a close look at this. If there's issues that need resolved, they'll have to be before anyone on City Council is ready to approve it. But again, we're doing that in the context of what the city plan says, what the provincial policy says. And this is a challenge because, as we've talked about a lot today, the zoning hasn't matched with the official plan. There's a lot of ambiguity around how city staff should evaluate that. So this is a really, really challenging file. I hope that answered your question. I'll add on my website again, if you go to glengower.ca, I've put some analysis of the different factors and the planning process. So there's a bit more context there. Going to go to Rena next. So Rena, if you could unmute.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rena.
Actually, we actually just wrote something up inside of the comments. This is absolutely sad to hear. We do have to go through a transitional stage where everything today has become obsolete tomorrow. For the people who are wielding the power, that's fantastic for you to say. Building a tower in this area where it's become a bedroom community, where we've lived for 20 years, having enjoyed the simplicity of the entire area. For a developer, an outside developer, mind you, be it that, from Montreal to come in and want to build a 25-story tower and burden us after they've completed their contractual obligations, who's going to pick up the tab for all of this stuff that's going to be developed or reconstructed? Our beautiful green water tower will probably need replacing because it's not going to furnish our entire area. Who's paying for this? This is absolutely ridiculous. We're talking about something we're going to actually pay for after everyone is bought in, built, packed up their stuff, gone, made their profit. We're going to be holding the bag. Who's paying for it?
Can you clarify just paying for what?
When you build an infrastructure, you're going to have to do sewer, you're going to have to do fire, you're going to have to do water, you're going to have to do electrical, your road widening, you're going to have to do everything that's going to have to accommodate these people who are not going to have cars to be in our community. Who's paying? Who's going to pay for it after everyone is packed up and left? The builders, the city. The city is going to pass on the burden to us, who's going to have to pay more taxes. How do you figure this is going to be paid for?
So I can answer quickly. This development will need to pay development charges, which every new home, apartment, business pays for new development. That money goes towards things like sewers and roads and transit and emergency services, all of the infrastructure. And then they're paying property taxes. So this would be a significant uplift in property taxes from what this property pays now. And the higher density does make it a more efficient producer of property taxes for the city. That's maybe a simplified way of looking at it. But thank you for sharing those concerns. I think we're going to try to go to folks with their hands up because there's a lot of duplication in our Q&A in the time that we have left. So next on the list is Sean. Sean, I'm going to unmute you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Gower. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
For my 300 or so neighbors in Stittsville that are on the call, the vast majority of which I think are opposed to this particular project, some of them should know that the FO in FOTEM stands for Ted Faubert. Prior to amalgamation, Mr. Faubert was the Director of Planning for the City of Ottawa. So he and Mr. Tremblay know how the game is played. For any of us to pick up the phone and try and get a meeting with the mayor, good luck. Mr. Faubert, Mr. Tremblay, et al. Are able to call up the mayor's office.
I'm just going to stop, Sean. We have a ton of questions that are specific to the development. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to go on to Garth, who's the next speaker here. Garth, if you can unmute, the floor will be yours.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Okay, great. I just want to make a kind of more of a comment before I get to what I originally planned to say, because as this call has gone on, I started to realize that partly, and maybe there's a little bit of a building off what the previous caller just said, which caught me by surprise, but you know, in terms of you know, setting the stage for this call, like who's who on this call? And who's paid by who, most particular, without any disrespect. Like who are the people who are talking, who are working and paid for by the city as consultants or directly work for the city versus who is paid for by the developer? Because all that, especially on the developer side, all that relates to some bias. And the average resident listening into this, you know, it sounds like, wow, that's a great plan, you know, and certainly a lot of work has gone into this to try to abide by various plans and zoning and such. But you can kind of be misled as to like, are they just trying to sell something or are they telling you something objectively? So just with that comment, I'm not sure I expect an answer really at this moment. But, you know, just as an example, a few minutes ago, you know, Miguel was commenting and he was clearly, I think he's with 410, he was clearly representing the developer. And then 2 minutes later, it sounded like he was representing or speaking on behalf of the city. So it was hard to know where some of those comments were coming from. Just as a point of note, you know, when the name comes up on my screen that somebody is speaking, if their affiliation was shown on there, it would be very useful to the you know, the residential observer. Okay, that's just a point of note.
Okay, thank you, Garth. I think it's pretty simple here. Kara and I in my office, so I'm the city councilor. Kara is one of my office staff. Everyone else who's on the panel here is either with FOTEN or Devmont, the developer, or one of their consultants. So they're all part of the applicant team. We'll go next to Laura, who has her hand up. Laura, are you with us? I can see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. Okay, I'm going to go to our next speaker and we'll try to come back to you in a moment, Laura. Next speaker is Alana.
Hi there. Thank you for
Hi.
the opportunity. So just before I speak, I just want to clarify I am both a Stittsville resident and a housing advocate. I'm about 2.8 kilometers from the proposed site. That seems to be sort of a common factor in many of the comments. I have one question and just sort of two quick comments. First of all, I want to applaud the developers for including 3-bedroom units. I think that actually recognizes and reflects the family nature of the community. And I do hope that we will see a fairly large number of 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom plus dens, and I'd be curious to know what the breakdown would be. Tonight here, I am here more importantly though as a daughter who is trying to figure out where my aging parents are going to move into Stittsville to be closer to me. I do see a desperate need for more apartment buildings in this part of our community. Particularly units that are one level. We have a lot of really interesting 3 stories and a lot of really interesting stacked towns. A lot of those have a lot of stairs. My own townhouse has a ridiculous number of stairs. So finding opportunities to have new developments that come in that create more diversity in the forms of housing that are available as our population ages, I think is tremendously important. And I certainly look forward to investigating this development should it proceed as a place where my parents can comfortably age in Stittsville, where the quality of life is high, and I think will only be made higher by bringing in a more diverse population. In terms of the height, I do have to share some of the concerns that many of my neighbors have raised. It is certainly going to be visually shocking. And I think understanding a little bit more about why the decision was made to go right to 25 and the way the step up was proposed, as opposed to having sort of a higher, lower buildings, if you know what I mean, and having it be less dramatic with the jump to 25 is a second question I would have. And again, I just want to applaud all my neighbors for how generally polite the conversation has been. I'm proud to be a part of it.
Okay, thank you, Elena. I know there were some questions in the Q&A about that distribution of height. Miguel or Roberto, do either of you want to address that question? Why 25 and why not some lower heights distributed in a different way?
If you actually look at one of the first proposals, when it was the 3 buildings, the height was distributed at an even 9 stories right across the board. And what actually happens when you do that is you actually create walls immediately everywhere. There's 9 stories everywhere in those original concepts. And so, which, would be just flat out allowed. And so the reality is it doesn't actually create quality architecture. It doesn't create quality space. Everything is very much a wall experience because everything is the same. And so what we tried to do here is look at, okay, how can we get transitions to go down to 3 stories at where we are much more closer to the low-rise neighborhoods and slowly transition our way up. The reality is also, and I don't think that there's any shying away from it, is that, right now, in order to make developments work, they have to be able to get enough density to make it work. And right now, interest rates are through the roof. Construction values are through the roof. Interest is just very, very hard to build these developments without appropriate amount of density. And so you can get the same amount of density that's being proposed here in in a lower distributed evenly, but you're actually going to get a way worse experience on the development. It's actually going to create really unlivable space. It's going to create more wall, more exposure, more of that 9-story being closer to the south of the property. That is actually going to be way worse for the local neighborhood. And so the idea here was always to how do we look at looking at the massing and looking at the density that's needed, but actually distributing it in a way that makes it much better overall. And yes, at the end, it is about providing much more height, but we've located it at the northernmost part of the property. We are way more than 50 meters from the property line at the shortest point. and that's just to the property line. That doesn't even include the distance of the transition from there on to the lower housing in itself. And so, which is probably closer to 70 meters by the time we're done, which is quite reasonable. And so the idea of doing this is actually to create visual interest, to create a massing that transitions very differently, but is actually reflective of trying to create a much lower density at the back of the site, which is right up against the low-rise neighborhood. So that's really how we look at it, is how do we distribute massing properly so that it actually creates a much nicer overall volume on the site and a much better feel for everybody around at the end of the day. And understand, like, don't get me wrong, we understand that people are not happy with height, but believe me, had we built all of this at 9 stories or everything here at 12 stories and evenly across the board, we'd be building 12 stories much closer to the south of the property, which would not be well received. But right now we've kept that to a low of 3 and then transition either to 6 or to 7 as we go further north towards Hazeldean.
And if I can jump in on the unit mix, currently I think we have 12% of the units that are 3 bedrooms and 38% that are 2 bedrooms. So half of the building is more than 2 bedrooms. And another reason, like, for the density that we're targeting is we aim to do energy efficiency building where we go 25% higher than what is required by code, and we plan on using geothermal to achieve those. So there is a critical mass to obtain for those buildings to work in residential settings, where typically geothermal projects are for institutional hospitals, schools, and stuff like that.
Okay, so thank you, Alana, for raising that and for your comments. Going to try to go back to Laura. Laura, if you're able to unmute, see if we can hear you.
Is this working now?
Yes, it is. Hi.
Okay, sorry. I really just wanted to raise my voice as well in support of the project. I realize it is going to be different. There's no question to see a high tower, but I very much look forward to the density, the ability of people to participate in the retail and the other things that are happening in Stittsville to make Stittsville grow. Oh, and I should say, I am a Stittsville resident of 35 years, and I don't belong to any association of any sort. I do live more than a kilometer away, I think, living down in the more closer to the Sacred Heart School. But I definitely support bringing this density in, and I really applaud in particular the amount of 3 and 2 bedroom units that are here. We do have to densify our city. As someone mentioned before, it is the opposite of sprawl. And this is being built essentially on a vacant lot, a scrub lot. I do have one question that I hope will be considered, and that is, like one of the speakers, I do believe this is constructed as a bit of an island away from Stittsville, like the core of Stittsville. I'd be happier to see it a little close to the center of town. Is the city or the developer considering any paths or pathing that will bring it inside Stittsville without having to go all the way around Stittsville, Maine, or do something like that so that kids can go to school, so they can access parks, etc., rather than just leaving it completely isolated? And that would be my only question.
Well, I can say it needs to be better connected than it is now, obviously, to Westridge. I mean, there's a park just near the next restaurant, so needs to have safe walking for anyone who might be living in this building to get there. And there's obviously that whole south side of Hazeldean Road does not have safe pedestrian amenities right now, so that needs to be upgraded at the same time that any development happens along the south side of the street. So definitely a concern. And thank you, Laura, for sharing your comments. we're going to go now to probably time for maybe a couple more people here before we have to wrap up. So we'll go to Dustin. Dustin, if you can unmute.
Hi, sorry.
Hi there.
Hi. Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate this. Yeah, I've been thinking about this for, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, perfect. I've been thinking about this question for a long time, like the way cities grow and whatnot. And I've been researching this, and I came across the concept of an eco village, something like this. And I believe it would actually meet and suit the needs of growth while respecting and possibly embodying the values of the local community in Stittsville. And I'm wondering if in the city's master plan, it has a notion like this carefully articulated. Yeah.
Okay.
Because
I'm not familiar with that specific concept, Dustin, but if you could send me an email, be happy to follow up with you offline on that.
oh, wonderful. Yeah, I will. I could do that. Yeah. And basically it's actually built off a grid-like model, so there is densification, but the buildings that are offered promote a kind of space where it's, you know, it's good for the pedestrian, good for like cyclists and all of that, but the buildings are really only about 7 to 8 stories tall. Yeah. And
Okay.
I have a hunch that it's more of a European concept from the densification that has occurred. Like they've had to deal with densification a lot longer than us, and their designs aren't quite as whatever. Anyhow, I'm interested, and I want to express this because as a local resident, I sense from what other people have said as well that we kind of have this gut feeling that it's like the developers are looking to see what they can get away with, and the city is looking to hear what kind of local resistance there will be. And it just sounds like 25 stories is like, it just doesn't sound like a good thing at all.
Okay. Thank you, Dustin. I'm going to stop you there because I want to get one more
No worries.
person.
I really appreciate this. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go now. Last speaker will be Baja. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, but if you can unmute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for for letting me speak. So I have a concern. A couple of years ago, we had a issue coming out of 417 on a Carp Road, and then they widened it and made it 2 lanes, and then that definitely helped to get the traffic through that intersection. Now with the 461 additional housing added in Stittsville, and having 6 buses per hour, which kind of totals maximum of 300 passengers per hour, with 0.9 parking space, I'm really doubtful that everybody in that building will have an opportunity to commute easily, and which means we're going to have more than 1 vehicle per household there. And rather than following any previously set standards, we should just calculate how many vehicles are in closest surrounding 461 households, and use that as an average, how many minimum parking spaces would be required. Because if they have kids, they have to transport them to the sports center, have to transport them everywhere. And with the buses going on a Hazeldean, that is just a direction east-west, but there's still north and south. So those are my two concerns. Carp Road exit, mostly. The second one is the amount of parking and transportation vehicle for the passengers there and how much it's going to affect us as a residents. And I had the additional ones. How much economy is it going to bring to the Ottawa City or Statesville in general, other than the property taxes? Anyway.
Thank you, Badra, for those comments. I think I estimated 10 or 11 million in development charges, a very rough estimate, and uncertain what the property tax would be on this. But perhaps at some point we could do a rough estimate on that. But thank you for joining us tonight. We're going to have to stop there because we do have a hard stop for a number of people at 9:30. I want to thank residents who participated tonight with your questions and comments. I know we did not get to everyone. If there's any information you did not hear tonight, please email me and we will track down an answer for you. If you haven't already, you can also share your comments with Sarah Ezio, the city planner. Do encourage you to send your email and comments. Sign up to my newsletter. Follow my website, glengower.ca. We'll be sharing any updates about this development and others there. And I want to thank the representatives from Foten and Devmont and the different their consultants who were with us tonight. And thank you, Kara, for all of your help behind the scenes and folks from my office staff who helped to organize this. And again, thank you to residents. We do appreciate all the feedback. And we'll be following up soon with next steps. So have a good night, everyone, and take care.